Morning. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Look forward to it.
Let me tell you, Tom, what a game for the Bears against the Rams. We've been talking about it for weeks now, just being able to run the football effectively, and it opened. So after you're looking at the film, what stood out most about the offensive line and the running game?
Just the productivity of DeAndre Swift, and I think that kind of gives you an opening because he was reading the run game well, and he was converting passing opportunities into first downs. And then you have a nice complementary back like Roshan Johnson, and I think you got to keep Khalil Herbert actively involved in this offense too. But it's still about how can this team get better? What can they do to get better? And this week will be a good test because Carolina is missing their best defensive linemen and two or three of their better defensive players. So I got to see it go from 1 week to the next because of, I think, DeAndre Swift, just his production per touch, 2.6 in the first couple of games, and then it was like 6.2 this past game. And so if you can still keep that production up by DeAndre Swift, I think it complements the rest of the offense.
What did you read into DJ Moore and Caleb Williams talking about their disconnect on that pass before the half, and then how they worked through that? What did you see from that, and do you feel like that chemistry and like finding that chemistry is just part of the early season growing pains?
Oh, for sure. I read nothing negative into it because it's going to take a countless amount of reps for Caleb Williams with every one of those receivers to feel comfortable about the timing, the tempo, the assuredness that they're going to be in the right spot. And it's just offensive development. If I would take away something from that, it's more of my concerns about the time protection of a pocket by the offensive line. Because if the quarterback is thinking, okay, I got to get the ball out of my hands maybe half a second to 3/4 of a second earlier than the tempo of the play from the time we call it in the huddle, and then the quarterback's trying to speed up his process, and maybe that'll affect accuracy or the rhythm of an offense. So to me, I would hope that the offensive line is able to construct more of a protective pocket and give Caleb clean space. Because the worst thing I want a quarterback to do is to drop back with peripheral vision to both sides and seeing how the pocket is shrinking. Mm-hmm. And so, listen, man, I love DJ Moore. The dude is a model citizen. I love everything that he brings into that locker room, his toughness, his performance. And I just think Caleb is just starting to scratch the surface of ultimately what he's going to be.
Tom Thayer is brought to you by the Village of Rosemont, located just outside the city. Rosemont is your one-stop destination for fun. Rosemont, it's all here. If Ditka asked you to be fullback eligible, would you have done it?
Hell yeah. My first play ever in my college career was Notre Dame USC, and I lined up at fullback.
Yeah.
And that was my first opportunity to get on the field, and man, I felt like King Henry. No kidding. And for a guy that's locally built in Kramer and waiting for his opportunity to get into a National Football League regular season game, and if he's got to line up anywhere, line up and do your job, and he was able to do it a couple times. But that may open up an opportunity for him to be a tight end on goal line offense, and may open up other opportunities for him. And I think it's a creative way of making sure that you're getting the best use out of your short yardage and goal line talent.
Yeah, I'm so happy for Kramer because when we talk about the offensive line, he's never in the conversation. We never talk about it. And then he does that. I enjoyed him at least getting an opportunity to get a feel of the game. That was cool.
And for a local kid who's tried so hard to stay on his hometown team roster, I think that's pretty spectacular. Tom, you mentioned right out of the gate you want to see the offense kind of stack up some of those performances like they did last Sunday. How important then is this next couple of stretches, or I guess couple of weeks with the games? You got Carolina and Jacksonville, and then the bye week, but winnable opportunities.
Huge, Dion. It's as huge for the offense is equally as huge for the defense because you're playing at home. The crowd has been super supportive. It's difficult to communicate on the line of scrimmage. But then you got Andy Dalton. In the first two games, Bryce Young was sacked 6 times. In the last 2 games, Andy Dalton has been sacked twice. So you got to start, keeping that destructive rhythm of the defensive line to put the quarterback in the most hurried position as possible. And they are doing a nice job of playing 8 defensive linemen. And each set of defensive linemen has good interior play and significant pass rushers on the outside. Maybe I'd like to see Daniel Hardy get a rep or two on the outside if you need him the most. But you're going to have to really respect this offense because Andy Dalton has changed the passing, and they drafted Xavier Leggett, who's a 6'3", 227-pound receiver. They have Johnson. So they have capable receivers, and Chuba Hubbard is a good running back, man. I think, they had 155 yards rushing last week. They're running the ball much more effectively because you have to respect Andy Dalton and the downfield attack. So as much as it is for an opportunity for offense to continue their process of improvement, that's, number one goal, I think, going forward. But you need the defense to come up and play that type of, completely I'm not looking for a shutdown game, but I'm looking to keep them out of the end zone touchdowns. Last week when they limited to field goals, I felt really good about it because I don't think you really gain the advantage by settling for field goals at the end of the day.
Tom Thayer with us here on the Kap and J Hood Morning Show on ESPN 1000 and streaming on the ESPN Chicago app. Tom, I asked a tough question on our 5 burning questions regarding the Bears yesterday. And the question was, through the first 4 games, who is the most valuable Bear? Cap said Jaquan Brisker. I said Jalen Johnson. If I asked you, sure, they're all important, but there's got to be one guy that says, boy, this galvanized the team. It brings it together. He's played the best. Who is that guy on this team so far?
God, it's a great question. Jeff and I were talking about that too, and he brought up Jalen Johnson as well. And maybe that is the case because I've been searching. I think we talked about it at the Hard Rock that, searching for an alpha male on this football team.
Mm-hmm.
And, Jalen Johnson talks confidently in front of the media. He's always presented himself with confidence, and he's lived up to expectations since he's been drafted, and he's been able to deliver after this new contract. And then the way that he's been able to, shut down that receiver and then everybody, all the other defensive backs filter in. But, Jaquan Brisker, he's not a bad choice either. So I think, when you look at it, I would like to say it's Darnell Wright. I would like to say that it's DeAndre Swift at this point. But right now, I think the best part of this football team is what the defense is doing.
Do they need an alpha bear in the locker room?
Hell yes. I mean, you got to have a couple of alpha males in that locker room that are holding people accountable to get in the weight room, to get onto the practice field, to make sure they understand their assignments, to put a little bit of pressure and angst in that locker room where sometimes you make it a little uncomfortable. And that was the great thing about McMichael, man. Steve McMichael, whether you're an offensive lineman, and, DeMarcus Walker is kind of like that. Whether you're an offensive lineman or a receiver or defensive back, McMichael always had that accountability where, listen, man, show up, shut up. And so to me, find me, develop me, anoint one, something is, an alpha guy is always needed on football teams.
You mentioned Chuba Hubbard, the running back for Carolina, 104 yards, 18 carries against the Bengals last Sunday. So, Tom, I'm just wondering, if I watch Andy Dalton, we know that he's just a solid veteran, a backup, but now is a starter now. I'm just wondering what the defense has to deal with because Dalton can fling it. There's no doubt. Yeah. But will this be a problem for the secondary in particular with Dalton coming back to Chicago?
If he's provided the amount of protection time that he needs according to the huddle call, yes. Because what's Andy Dalton got to lose? What is it? Are they going to cut him? No. Is he trying to make the foundation of his career that's yet to come? No. So Andy Dalton's not going to be afraid of windows of opportunity. He's not going to be afraid of trying to use a veteran guy like Deontay Johnson or a young guy like Leggett. So I think that those are the kind of guys that scare me the most, and I was really happy the way that they played last week against Stafford, because I thought he was the best quarterback that they were going to play up until that point, because they played a bunch of second-year guys up until that point, and all due respect to C.J. Stroud. But I think guys that have seen every defense, they've seen every blitz that can come, if they're trying to hide it or not. And yeah, I got a lot of respect for Andy Dalton. He's paid his dues to started in this position to try to secure that whole coaching staff's jobs, because he's going, okay, this system does work. It's not the fault of the head coach that this quarterback didn't work out. And so that's what I think about Andy Dalton.
Yeah.
You agree?
Mm-hmm. He's a good guy.
He is, but can he beat
He's
the Bears?
got the experience. I don't know,
Yeah.
but he's got the experience, and I think that makes a big difference. I mean, they have such a young head coach who can now trust a quarterback to execute in a way that Bryce Young could not. I mean, that does make a difference.
Yeah.
Dion, you're exactly right.
Lou Canellis, the head coach for Carolina, right? Is that him?
His cousin, his distant cousin Dave, I
Sweet
believe.
Lou.
There's no throwback question to ask you, Thayer, because there was no Carolina when you were in the league.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Sometimes you make me rack my brain. But did you know that the Bears are third in the league in separation by the receivers?
Yes.
I know. I heard you guys talking about it.
Yes, Shay Norling gives you that. Yes.
I didn't know that. That's not a real stat.
It is a real stat. See,
I
Shay
don't
brings
believe
it.
you.
And guess what? Tom's going to use it in the broadcast. He's going to blow Jeff's mind.
He is.
I'm not going to use it. I'm going to save it for Dion to use at the end of her TV.
I'm tossing back. That's what I'm going to do, Tom.
Yeah.
Tune in. You have to be on the edge of your seat for when I talk about separation created by Roma Dunze.
Tom, have a great call. Looking forward to this game. Let's get a victory here. Let's get a victory in the UK, and then go in the bye week. Just get off to a really good start offensively. That's the other thing, too. You heard those boo birds like all of us did in the first quarter, because the Bear fans like, oh, here we go again with the slow start offensively and the penalties. Before we should talk about that. It's one thing to have some pre-snap penalties and the offensive line's a little bit out of sync, but it's not just them, it's everybody. You cannot have that many penalties, especially when you're playing good teams. You got to get this ironed out now.
Well, Jay Hood, so the first game of the year they open at home. Caleb is in control of the cadence at the line of scrimmage, but it's his first game. Mm-hmm. Then they go to 2 away games that you're completely dysfunctional with the volume cadence because of the environments they were playing in. Now, this is a readdress back to the volume cadence with Caleb at home. So I do expect way more efficiency at the line of scrimmage according to the cadence with Caleb, because it's going to be 2 games in a row now. And so that means rather than going to those practices against Houston and Indianapolis where you don't use it, now you're in 2 weeks of practices where you're using it. So, I think that Caleb is continuously going to get better at how deceptively he can use the snap count.
Tom, as always, we appreciate it,
Tom.
man. Thanks for coming.